on January 6th. The former president posted on Truth Social an audio clip from a choir of insurrectionist convicts singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Meanwhile, former senior advisor to President George W. Bush, Karl Rove, is calling out Trump for supporting the January 6th rioters.
What those people did when they violently attacked the Capitol in order to stop a constitutionally mandated meeting of the Congress to accept the results of the Electoral College is a stain on our history. And every one of those sons of who did that, we ought to find them, try them, and send them to jail. And one of the critical mistakes made in this campaign is that Donald Trump has now said, I'm going to pardon those people because they're hostages. No, they're not. They're thugs. I'm a Republican. I don't want to have a Democrat president. I want to have a Republican president. But we're facing as a country a decision, and everybody gets to make it, as to what kind of leadership we're going to have. And to me, it is a mistake on the part of the Trump campaign to allow the president's impulses to identify himself with the people who assaulted the Capitol rather than people who stand for law and order.
Yeah. Just great clarifying language from Karl Rove, a guy who has been a loyal Republican his entire life. And he went on to say Democrats should use January 6th as a political issue. Damn right they should. And Jen, I was talking about other cable news channels. There are some of the most prominent hosts on a certain cable news channel who say that January 6th is not a big deal. And Mika makes me watch this other cable news channel a lot, just to say you need to see what they're saying. And we were watching one show, and there was somebody, a host, that said, for some reason over on MSNBC, they actually think January 6th is a big deal. While other people on the panel were saying, January 6th is not a big deal. Let me tell you something. I have a lot of friends. I have family members who were all in for Trump. In 2016, they were all in for Trump. In 2020, and I've said it before, despite the fact he accused me of being a murderer, tried to get me jailed and executed, they still voted for Trump. You might say, what kind of friends are those? Well, perhaps one day I'll figure that out. That said, January the 6th moved a lot of them away from Trump. A lot of them. The attempt to have me executed didn't, but this did. Now, I suspect, like I'm sure you do too, some of those people will wander back into Trump's camp. We're seeing billionaires, just gross political, just cowards going back to Trump. But I suspect Karl Rove's right. For a hell of a lot of conservatives like me, for a hell of a lot of Republicans, former Republicans like me, we're not going to forget this.
I think there's no question about that, Joe. I mean, let me start with this. I mean, I worked on the Kerry campaign. Back in the day, not too long ago, Karl Rove was like the evil devil reincarnate, right? He's there stating what I think most Americans, I would hope, would agree with, which is that an attack on our Capitol and what we're seeing in this video footage right now is not who we should aspire to be as a country, right? And I think that is a message that's not partisan. It's a message about patriotism and what our values are. And I do think it is central to what the Biden campaign's messaging is and certainly should be. We also underestimated, remember, back leading up to the 2022 election, not us, any of us particularly, but I think there was an underestimation out there of the impact of the democracy argument, standing up for democracy and how important it is to voters, that it was feeling too highfalutin or too, highbrow. People do care about it, and I think it's important to remember that.
Hey, Jim,
so I'll take the Karl Rove advice anytime.
Exactly. I bet you never thought you would say that in 2004.
That's my thing.
Jen,
I know.
Nope.
I want to circle back and say you're exactly right. And I want to underline this fact for everybody that continues to mock and ridicule Joe Biden's campaign. We all remember in 2022, he gave the speech on democracy. They talked about abortion. And Jen, I sat and listened to podcasts where one person after another mocked and ridiculed him for talking about democracy, too highfalutin. Abortion, only 5% of people care about that. And then on election night, guess what? Once again, Biden's critics were wrong. Biden was right.
Right. And people were wrong about voters and what motivated, inspired, excited voters to go out to the polls in a midterm election. That's an important thing to remember. And they've been wrong about special elections, too. So let's learn the lessons and bet on these issues mattering for 2024.
So let's bring into this conversation NBC News justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan has new reporting tied to the insurrection titled "Meet Some of the Violent January 6th Rioters That Donald Trump Keeps Calling Hostages." Ryan, good to see you. But you've just uncovered an NBC analysis here that most of these who have been charged on January 6th, who haven't faced trial yet, are out. They're not being locked up. Only 15 currently being held, before they face the courtroom. But talk to us about those who are in there.
Yeah, so these were individualized decisions for these 15 individuals who are being held pre-trial. Everybody else who was locked up has been convicted either by a jury of their peers or by a judge. These 15 individuals have not yet been convicted, but they are being held at the order of a federal judge because of some of these factors in their cases. One of them allegedly set off a bomb inside the Capitol. See that tunnel that we just saw on the screen there earlier? Somebody threw a bomb in there. It exploded. People lost their hearing for days. Another individual who previously stabbed a man to death fired off a gun into the air, allegedly, according to prosecutors. There's another individual, a January 6th defendant, who was released and then plotted to kill the FBI agents who were investigating him. His co-defendant in that case has already pleaded guilty, admitted that there was a conspiracy here. So, there's this idea that I think a lot of Republicans want to come up with where they really don't want to get into the specifics of any of these cases. They'd rather talk about this generically as though there's a bunch of grannies locked up in Supermax for holding a sign, when in reality, the people who are in jail have been accused of extremely serious crimes in the case of these 15 individuals. And for all of the others, they're convicted criminals who have been convicted of the offenses at which they were charged. They either admitted to a court that they were guilty of what they were charged with, or they were found guilty by either a judge when they chose to go to a bench trial, or by a jury. 12 individuals got together, looked at the evidence and said, this is what happened. So to call individuals who are, incarcerated and sentenced to prison by judges who are appointed by members of both parties, I would underline, hostages is really just not in any way reality. And so I thought it was important to focus really here on those 15 individuals who actually haven't been convicted of anything yet and lay out for the American public exactly why they are being held and the well-reasoned conclusions that judges made about why they should be held pre-trial.
Exactly.
Boy, that's such an important investigation. Thank you for doing that,
NBC
Ryan.
News Justice correspondent Ryan Riley, thank you for that new reporting this morning. We want to mention Ryan's recent book on the insurrection entitled Sedition Hunters, How January 6th Broke the Justice System.
Coming up, ahead of the Senate considering the articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, we'll speak with someone who previously held that position. Jay Johnson will join
Alejandro Mayorkas during his impeachment trial in the Senate. Mayorkas is the first cabinet member to be impeached since 1876. And the move is raising concerns surrounding the handling of future impeachments. Former Homeland Security Secretary under President Obama, Jay Johnson, tells the Washington Post, quote, "I fear that other attempts to impeach cabinet officers will now follow. Like Supreme Court confirmation hearings, history teaches that once we lower the bar, the whole process is permanently degraded. My other concern is that given all this, no future president will be able to recruit a serious and capable person to protect Homeland Security." And Jay joins us now. I think the key word here, word of the day, is normalization, the normalizing of things like this. Are you concerned about the Department of Homeland Security being undermined in the long term, especially?
Yes. Mika, many people forget that Homeland Security is much more than border security. It's cybersecurity, it's counterterrorism, it's maritime security, it's aviation security through the TSA, it's protection of our national leaders through the Secret Service. it's FEMA, it's protection of federal government buildings. And so the secretary at any one time has at least 10 different missions, including the Immigration Border Security mission. And my biggest concern about this political charade, which we're about to undergo in the Senate, is that it, first of all, degrades the process. It's a constitutionally prescribed process. It degrades the process, but it degrades the office of Secretary of Homeland Security and makes it much, much harder to recruit somebody in the future who's willing to step up and protect our homeland.
Let's pull back and get one more House man going to another more. We got the Morehouse caucus here. That's 40% of all current Morning Joe guests.
Indeed.
Right.
Morehouse man.
So, Mr. Secretary,
He's a bit younger than me.
Just a tad.
I was the greatest class of Morehouse, class of 1979.
Class of 89, actually.
Okay.
But given your description, so would you see this politicization of the process as a threat to national security?
Yes.
Given the level of talent that we're concerned about?
Yes.
So say a little bit more about that.
First of all, it distracts the cabinet secretary with the responsibility for the protection of all of these different missions. And second, it makes it much harder to find somebody in the future who's willing to step up and do this job. The job has become such a political lightning rod. I mean, it wasn't a walk in the park when I was there, but it's become such a political lightning rod that I worry that you're never going to find anybody credible after this who's willing to step up and do the job. Some former governor or some retired four-star, they're all going to say, no, I don't need this.
And
make me Secretary of Agriculture.
There you go. Yeah, the Senate may just move to dismiss the charges. They're not going to get two-thirds of the Senate to convict.
I believe they should.
And they may say, we're not going to even entertain this. Speaker Johnson has said, no, you at least have to go through the process. We'll see. But let's put the impeachment aside for a moment, to the root of what we're talking about here, which is the border. That's the objection of Republicans in the Congress, but also of many Americans to what's going on down there. It's not a radical Trump position to think that something has to change at the border. So as a former Secretary of Homeland Security, what is reasonable to expect to change at the border to have a more orderly system of immigration?
What we need to have changed down there is what's embodied in the legislation that Jim Langford, Chris Murphy, and Kirsten Sinema negotiated. It is a pro-border security bill, and the fact that Republicans in Congress seem to have sort of pushed it aside in favor of the politics because they'd rather have the issue to campaign on versus solving the problem.
And they just say it out loud. Trump has said, blame me for everything that happens bad at the border. Just blame me.
Right.
Because this will help Joe Biden if it passes.
I don't want this fixed unless I'm president. But the bill fixes the asylum adjudication system, deals with the backlog, lowers the bar on the front end. It's very easy to establish credible fear when you first enter the country, which serves as a magnet for illegal immigration. More Border Patrol agents, more judges, an emergency Title 42-like authority when the numbers reach a certain level. And this was a, hard negotiated bipartisan bill that appears to be going nowhere because it's an election year and Donald Trump doesn't want it to happen. Meanwhile, there are people in Texas, Arizona, and these communities across the border and here in New York and elsewhere that are in crisis right now because of this situation. I don't know why more members of Congress, including Republicans, are not stepping up and saying, hey, let's fix this problem. My constituents demand it.
Right, and the Border Patrol wants it fixed as well. Yeah. Can you help us understand what's driving? Politics, political season. Like, oh, Joe Biden's been too lax. No, people they're not hanging out in El Salvador going, Joe Biden said this, and so now we're gonna, everybody's gonna be flooding north. This started actually in 2017 with Donald Trump. People don't like to hear it.
Yeah.
The reality is that when Barack Obama and Joe Biden left office, illegal border crossings across the southern border were at 50-year lows. Let me say that again. When Biden and Obama left office, and your administration too.
I was there.
You were there. Illegal border crossings were at a 50-year low.
Ahead, a first look at a new ad from a group hoping to reclaim the issue of faith from Donald Trump.
A group that says it is dedicated to bringing people of faith together to restore the soul of the nation is releasing a new digital ad this morning. The organization says the six-figure ad buy is, quote, meant to communicate directly to faith voters who are uneasy with the idolatry and message behind God made Trump. That was a video from Trump supporters that depicted the former president as a Messiah-like figure. Here now is an exclusive first look at Faith Forward's new ad.
McCaskill, a strong, provocative commercial, obviously playing off of the one that set up Donald Trump as an idol, straight out of Jeremiah. What's your thought on that ad?
Well, first of all, I think it's powerful. Second of all, I think the Biden campaign needs to lean into every single area that Donald Trump is trying to claim, including faith. The contrast between these two men and how they've lived their life according to faith couldn't be more bizarre and different. Donald Trump clearly is uncomfortable with the contours of Christianity. He's never lived it. He's never looked at God's commandments or Jesus's teachings as instructive to him. He said that he didn't need to ask for forgiveness for anything. I mean, how can you claim to be a Christian and say you don't need to be forgiven for anything? It is so unbelievably bizarre. And, you know, if you listen to Reverend Warnock, Senator Warnock, about the money changers, and that's Donald Trump, that were chased out. And so I really think leaning into his faith, leaning into immigration, leaning into crime, leaning into all of the things that Donald Trump is trying to claim as his campaign foundation is the best way for Biden to hold on to the Oval Office.
Yep.
You know, the point you make is so critically important here, Claire, because Trump followers, evangelicals, will say, well, everybody's done this, everybody's done that, everybody sins, Joe Biden sinned, everybody. And yet, again, growing up in the Baptist church, what we learned, and it's great, again, in this time after Easter, to be reminded of it, that if you're a Christian, you believe that Christ died for your sins, and you need to ask for forgiveness. And, you know, that you see the bumper sticker across the South, Christians aren't perfect, just forgiven. That is the central core belief of evangelical Christianity. I can't speak for other parts of Christianity. I think it's the same. But for evangelicals, it's always been ask for forgiveness. That's always at the call after, you know, you go through 20 verses of just as I am. Ask for forgiveness, it will be given. Right? Donald Trump undercuts that in a way that no evangelical I ever grew up with would have been okay with. But when Donald Trump says, I've never done anything wrong, no reason to be forgiven, they still fall right in line and say, oh, he's the second coming of Christ. I mean, they idolize him, and it's twisted. I still, again, growing up in the Baptist church, after all these years, I can't explain it. I can't explain it. How they would kind of like, this is a great follow-up to what Jeffrey's Atlantic article talks about. How do these people that I know, that I knew, that I grew up with, how do they embrace a guy like this who says, no, I've never asked for forgiveness because I don't need forgiveness from God?
Yeah.
Claire?
It's unbelievable. Well, it's unbelievable. I'm quiet because I want to let it sink in. Forget all the excuses that these evangelical ministers are using. You know, oh, the Supreme Court, and oh, you know, restricting abortion, and oh, he's not going to let people use the wrong bathroom. Forget all of that. This is a man who said out loud that he did not need forgiveness. Now, I don't know of any priest or pastor or minister in the Christian faith that would let that go and not grab onto it and say, wait. You need to understand the most fundamental part of Christianity, the most fundamental part. And I for the life of me, overlook the adultery, overlook the sexual assault, overlook all of that if you want. But how can he not ask for forgiveness for any of it? For any of it. That's really just astounding, and something that, and by the way, Biden is quick to point to his faith. And by the way, Biden goes to Mass. Biden knows the scriptures. Biden, he's not a perfect Catholic by any means. None of us are perfect Christians, but he understands his faith, and his faith is fundamental to who he is. This is something that the Biden campaign should lean into, especially on topics like immigration. What would Jesus think of a guy who said that these people who are desperate at our borders, desperate that they're vermin and they are not people? I mean, Jesus would be appalled at that. Jesus would speak out on that. And so on all these topics, he is so un-Christian-like. It is just astounding to me that we aren't seeing more ads like this. I hope we do. I think it's really important.
Claire McCaskill, thank you very much for coming on this morning.
Still ahead, the actress Sarah Paulson on her dark comedy Appropriate, which is now appearing on Broadway. Of Morning Joe weekend. We have lots to get to, so let's jump right into some of the most important conversations we had this week.
They were targeted systematically, car by car, because they were not successful in hitting. They keep trying. This happened over more than 1.5, 1.8 kilometers. So this was not just a bad luck situation where, we dropped the bomb in the wrong place, or no. Every country, obviously, that nationals, including the United States, that had nationals that died on this attack, we need to have an investigation that is neutral. Humanitarians and civilians should never be paying the consequences of war. This is a basic principle of humanity. At the time, this looks like it's not a war against terrorism anymore. Seems this is a war against humanity itself.
You know, so many investigations that need to be done, so many investigations that are being put off, so many investigations, why are you tracking these trucks from an organization that you know is delivering tons of food of aid to Gaza to bring desperately needed aid to Gaza? Why were they tracking them? Why did they fire on them? They were clearly marked. After all, this is the same IDF. This is the same Netanyahu government that was bragging about their pinpoint precision and being able to kill Iranian leaders just a few days ago. And here, with pinpoint precision, with their logos on the top of these vans for the World Central Kitchen, missiles are delivered through the middle of those vans, and they're targeted. I mean, my God, and so many investigations coming after the war's over, we're told. Benjamin Netanyahu says
now is not
about
the time.
Those hostages. Now's not the time. The hostages who escaped, who took their shirts off, who raised their hands after escaping from the horror of being a Hamas hostage, and the IDF with their hands in the air, with their shirts off, IDF guns them down. Oh, that's an investigation we have to worry about later, too. And then Netanyahu knowing for a year beforehand of Hamas's plans. They had the plans in hand in the government, doing absolutely nothing about it, doing absolutely nothing about the illicit funding that Trump and Netanyahu knew about in 2018, the funding sources that kept Hamas's war machine alive. They looked the other way. They said, don't worry about it. And of course, as I've said on this show, and yet for some reason Netanyahu still is not having to answer for this. As I've said repeatedly, Netanyahu sent a representative up to Doha 3 weeks before the attack on October the 7th. The leaders of Qatar said, do you guys still want us to keep sending all this money to Hamas? The answer, yes, of course we do. Netanyahu was the chief sponsor of Hamas through Qatar. It was Netanyahu that was keeping the money flowing there. Well, but we can't investigate that until after the war is over. We can't do anything until after the war is over. We can't ask any questions about why Benjamin Netanyahu set up a situation where Hamas had the weapons, the powers, the means to basically walk into Israel, and assault the IDF and the famed Israeli Defense Forces with mopeds, drugged up terrorists, and paragliders? And Benjamin Netanyahu did nothing for hours while Israeli women were beaten and raped and killed, and grandmothers were beaten and burned to death. Babies were shot in their cribs. Parents had to watch these terrorists, I'd like to call them something else, these terrorists shoot their children in front of them. And children were forced to watch as these terrorists shot their parents in front of them. 1 hour goes by, Netanyahu's government does nothing. 2 hours, nothing. 3, 4, the rapes continue. 5 hours, 6 hours, nothing. 7 hours, not 8 hours, not 10 hours. Some places 12, 13 hours, nothing is done. Well, what happened that day? How in the hell did Benjamin Netanyahu's government allow that to happen? Oh, you can't ask those questions. We're fighting a war. Why would you allow this man to continue running your country when he is responsible?
I think they're asking that question.
When he is responsible for Hamas being able to run loose in Israel and commit the worst atrocities against Jews since the Holocaust. We know the nature of Hamas. We know their stated goal has always been to kill Jews, to destroy Israel. Yet Netanyahu was funding them. Netanyahu had their war plans. Netanyahu did nothing. Netanyahu, he was asleep at the switch when this happened. I mean, Hamas, it's like scorpions. If you had a nanny put scorpions in your baby's crib, would you say, well, you know, it's a tough time right now. The baby's in the hospital. We better keep the same nanny until the baby... No! In this case, the man who is almost singularly responsible for letting Israel's guard down because he was too interested in fighting the rule of law in Israel. He was too interested in dividing one Israeli against the other. He was too busy tending to the needs of religious extremists, so much so that he kind of forgot to take care of the secular elements of the IDF and the Mossad and the intel services that had kept Israel safe since 1948. How long? How long? Let's bring in Admiral Stavridis. Admiral, I do not ask you to associate with a single word I said. I do though want to know how long. I believe, it is my belief, and if I am wrong, please push back. The damage, the harm that Benjamin Netanyahu is inflicting on Israel, that he has already inflicted on Israel, that he will inflict on Israel for years to come because of his behavior since and before October the 7th, seems to me is so massive that we're going to have to leave it to historians and future generations to sum it up. But I'm just wondering, how long does this continue? The hell that we're seeing play out in Israel and Gaza?
Let's start with the political. I think that the clock is indeed ticking on Benjamin Netanyahu for all the reasons you articulate. No democracy can tolerate that kind of incompetence on display again and again and again. That clock is ticking. And I think we're going to hear from the center of Israeli politics, the center left of Israeli politics, and they're going to demand answers appropriately to the questions you just posed. And I would indeed associate myself very strongly with all of that. I'll add that in the center of that cabinet is former general, leader of the Israeli Defense Forces, Benny Gantz, who is someone I worked with consistently during the 4 years I was Supreme Allied Commander in NATO. You're seeing a photograph of him right now. He's steady. He's deeply respected within that society, and he obviously knows the security and the international aspects of all of this. He gets it on how this is damaging Israel in the longer term. And Joe, you laid out very well all of the internal dynamics and questions. I'll give you a couple on the international scene, starting with a tormented, obviously heartbroken leader in Jose Andres, with whom I have worked on a number of different things in my capacity as chairman of the board of the Rockefeller Foundation. He's passionate, emotional, and appropriately furious at the idea that this attack on his forces could be called an accident. It was a deliberate shot. It was taken with bad intelligence, obviously. But I'll close with this. We absolutely need complete clarity, transparency on the upcoming investigation. And no, it can't wait until after hostilities stop, probably months from now. It's got to happen now.
Don't go anywhere. Morning Joe Weekend returns after a short break.